Hey, Commanders fans and football fans alike. Thank you for tuning in tonight. We're going to get started in 60 seconds. We got a lot queued up to talk about tonight on the field, off the field. So put that baseball game on mute, turn off the NHL playoffs, and join me for Commanders Gridiron in 60 seconds. Hey there, welcome back. Good evening. I'm your host, Steve Lockman. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Commanders Gridiron, where we talk everything on and off the field, Washington Commanders. And as you know, during the offseason, we're on like a 3-week rotation here. A, it kind of fluctuates better with my work schedule at the Firehouse. B, let's just be honest, for the most part, aside for like the NFL Combine, schedule release, which we're going to talk about tonight, OTAs, rookie mini camp, and some odd things here and there. It kind of gives you a little bit more time to get some things to talk about on the shows that we do. Once we get going into training camp, more probably around the preseason schedule, then we'll go a little bit more regularly, probably every week, so to speak, at like the middle of August or so. But until now, we're going to be every third as we're currently doing. So thank you again, once again, for tuning in tonight. As you see at the bottom of the scroll there, our topics are scrolling, so you can see where we're at in the topic list, what we've talked about, what's coming up. Feel free to comment. Feel free to chime in, ask questions, say hello. I love the chat. For those of you on Twitter, feel free to message through that as well. We can also take your messaging through there, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch. I love conversation, love being engaged with the viewers, so don't be afraid to chime in where you see fit. So as we usually typically do, we start with some off-the-field news for our beloved Washington Commanders. And over the last 2 weeks, look, there's been no shortage of news for our team, kind of just like every other team. It's just a matter of how important it is to you, right? So a lot of it doesn't make national news, so to speak, because one, our team is, not respected or loved by any stretch of the imagination. And, for the most part, it's just a matter of Adam Peters and Josh Harris doing what they're doing and still assembling that team of front office people. But for local people, local fans, local journalists, they are some kind of bigger headlines for us just because of who they are and what they do, right? So the first one was the hiring of Brandon Sosna, who is now going to be the senior vice president of football operations underneath Adam Peters, the GM who came over from San Francisco. Where you may recognize this guy's name is Sosna spent the last 2 seasons with the Lions up in Detroit as their senior director of football administration. He oversaw Detroit's strategic planning, salary cap management, and serving as their chief contract negotiator, which we're going to touch on in a second here. But reporting to GM Adam Peters, Sosna will be the club's lead contract negotiator. He's going to oversee a number of football operation departments, including the new analytics, health and performance of football administration. He's also going to be a major role in the strategy around the roster construction, the salary cap, and the collective bargaining agreement. So for this guy, first off, you kind of don't really recognize the name, don't really know who he is. Look, when I saw his picture, couldn't have picked him out from anybody walking down the street, right? But when you just read into what I kind of just read here about what the guy brings from Detroit specifically as his most recent stop, it kind of makes you seem a little bit more promising, right? So we know that Detroit has kind of been an up-and-coming team in the NFC. Obviously, they've had some good years under Dan up there, and now they just signed Goff to a long-term contract extension, as well as, their number 1 wide receiver, doing some good stuff in the draft, solidifying the defense, basically going from bottom of the barrel to what could potentially be an annual NFC powerhouse, right? Let's be honest. So when you can bring somebody from the business management, administration side of things from that kind of a caliber team and culture into your own team, it's kind of just a win-win, right? So, we know that when under the new ownership and leadership of GM Adam Peters, a lot of the deals that we signed in free agency, which we turned about a third to 50% of our roster over this season, majority of them were all 1-year deals. Very few, I think less than a half dozen of those free agent contracts were more than a year. They were 3-year deals. There were like 1 or 2 that were 2-year deals, but it was basically either 1-year deals or 3-year deals. So by having this guy coming in, Brandon Sosna, come in from Detroit, who's now basically going to lead contract negotiation, knowing the CBA between the NFL, the NFLPA, as well as, the teams, I think it can only benefit our team moving forward and putting that personnel, group together to put the best players on the field, bringing in talent, not only for depth purposes, but for instant starting power as well, and kind of go from there, right? So you got to think that everything about this guy is going to be positive. So, let's see what he can do. He's not going to be, an X's and O's guy on the field and kind of go from there. But, welcome addition into Adam Peters' staff. Hey, Eileen, thanks for checking in tonight. Greatly appreciated. The second hire, and it was kind of a big hire for us, on the non-football side of things, the non-X's and O's, right, is going to be, they added Dwayne Jones as a national scout. And before we talk about Dwayne Jones, Paul says, hey, look, Detroit spent some serious money this offseason. St. Brown, $30 million, Goff, $54 million, right? And it was interesting because, Goff is basically, I think it's by AAM, which is the annual average value, or actually AAV, annual average value. He's the highest paid quarterback in the NFL now, even though his total lump sum isn't the highest but he's up there with, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, those cats that have all been signing big deals here recently. So, Paul's 100% right. This guy is the guy that basically helped negotiate those deals, kind of figures out, the cap guru for that team. So, he's basically now going to be DC's cap guru, so to speak. So the other big thing that kind of came into play for us here in DC was we recently added Dwayne Jones as a national scout. So why does this matter? There's been a lot of talk, a lot of chatter, a lot of complaining that, our scouting department was never really as good as it should be. The fact of, not necessarily complaining. I mean, I guess you could say that they were complaining, fans and media, like, about the level of talent and the evaluations that we were doing for the personnel, whether it was rookies, whether it was free agents, whether it was, personnel that we were trying to eye or that teams eye in the trade market, stuff like that, right? So, because one of the biggest complaints that always was under former coach Ron Rivera is that, he thought he had the best players on the field. Well, we do have the best players for the group that we have in DC, but the talent level just wasn't there. Let's be honest, these guys were okay to good, couple above average, right? Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Allen Payne, couple guys, like that, your key building blocks. But the guys who kind of really needed to make the difference just didn't match up well skill level with opposing teams, offensively or defensively. So Jones was most recently the assistant director of college scouting for the Falcons, but he served a lot of time with the Ravens and the Saints. He was actually a part of the team that drafted Michael Thomas when he was with the Saints, Lamar Jackson when he was with the Ravens. So, to most people, and myself included, this has got to be considered another front office home run, right? So Peters made the impressive addition by adding, David Blackburn as well, as the director of player personnel. Basically, Blackburn was a 2021 Bart List honoree, which recognizes top NFL scouts. So this goes in conjunction with Dwayne Jones that they hired to kind of bolster that scouting department, right? Blackburn joined former GM Ozzie Newsome in Baltimore in 2007, spent 17 seasons with the Ravens, highly regarded front office, whether it's coaches, whether it's GMs, whether it's, scouting personnel, a lot of people look to winning organizations, winning cultures, and kind of pluck those individuals into their own organizations, right? So this is kind of a continuation of that. Peters continued to flip the scouting department on its head, as we kind of just alleviated with the hiring of Dwayne Brown, creating a new stable of successful and proven talent evaluators as a chief strategy for future success, right? So while a lot of times fans and gurus and stuff like that don't necessarily look at this side of things as being important, it's not flashy, it's not, it's not what you see on Sundays. This part of the organization is probably just as important as anything else inside, your football team's organization. These are the people that do all the homework on, the draft list and the way you're going to compile your potential picks of who you want for draft day. It's the people who are constantly evaluating tape on a weekly basis to say, hey, look, we need to try and get this person by the trade deadline. This person is going to be a free agency at the end of the year. Do we want to pick them up? Where do we rank the positions that we have need for, and what talent do we want to go after, right? So these guys play a lot of important roles in the team, even though they definitely don't get the publicity and the fame and the flash for what they do, right? So as Paul says, what I would do for a guy that can control the salary cap right now, all great front office additions for the Commanders, and coming from somebody who's a diehard and true Dallas Cowboys fan, that's pretty respectable, right? Because while I feel that we're still working, and let's be honest, we're going through the rebuilding process. We're not just a couple players and positions away from being a Super Bowl contender or even an annual, playoff contender. We're still basically bottom feeders trying to work our way up. But we're putting the pieces in place to hopefully sustain that in the long term with guys that have been proven from other organizations, other good cultures, other good processes that have been proven to work for their teams. And, coming from a Dallas Cowboys fan who's, current woes and struggles with the current salary cap and the off season, I can definitely, I don't want to say chuckle at Paul, but you know where I'm coming from, that, it definitely makes things a lot easier when you have that going for you than when you don't, right? It kind of makes sense. So, that's kind of probably one of the biggest of the two off the field news. The second of which, as you see, is it scrolling down across the bottom of your screen there, the 2027 draft site. So, it's super interesting. And I'm going to correlate this back to, I think it was right after the draft, sometime around the draft, give or take around there. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell was on the Pat McAfee show, who I try to listen to every day, even if it's, a couple days after on my way to work. I'll throw in a podcast, listen to it on my commute to work or way home. And the NFL commissioner was on there, and they were talking about I guess it was right after the NFL draft, because he was talking about the attendance up in Detroit this year for the NFL draft, and then comparing that to previous seasons when it was in Kansas City, when it was in Nashville, when it was in Chicago, and blah, 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 blah. And he basically said that, it's the NFL draft for host cities is now basically becoming almost like a bid session, to the point of equality with Super Bowl bidding. And, Pat asked the question, well, why is that? And, Commissioner Goodell said, I think one of the reasons that's being so competitive in the bidding process or lobbying process to get your team, your city to have the NFL draft is, a time of year. So in most cases, for the most part, now that the draft is, at the end of April, that, climate, temperature, environment, opens it up to almost any city in the NFL to host the draft. which is a multi-day process, right? I mean, let's be honest. It starts Thursday night, goes Friday, goes Saturday, but with all the activities and stuff, it's a little bit longer compared to, cities that may not have the opportunity to host the Super Bowl in February because of weather, because of open stadiums, because of, whatever else you name it. So, a lot of teams that don't see themselves as a good fit or outlook for the Super Bowl kind of see themselves as, hey, we're gonna, we could fill that role for hosting the NFL draft. So as we know, 2026 was just awarded to Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Steelers for the draft. So as when that came out a couple of days afterwards, it was kind of actually surprising. But so actually the next two hosts for the NFL draft is going to be Green Bay in 2025 and Pittsburgh in 2026. Both awesome cities, both cities that, back to what I just said a couple seconds ago, traditionally are not going to be in the Super Bowl rotation because of climate, weather, outdoor stadiums, because the NFL typically likes to stay in domes when you're not in, LA, Arizona, Florida, that type of deal. So both of their cities are going to be awesome draft cities, I feel, for the next 2 years. And then lo and behold, like a day or two after that popped up that Josh Harrison company had been lobbying the NFL to try and get the 2027 NFL draft. Now, let's be honest that, it's definitely something that I would be happy to go. If DC gets the draft, I'll go. I'll attend Thursday night. I don't care if I'm there till midnight. But, I got this great vision. Hopefully it's the same vision that Josh Harrison company have if they get the draft. As Paul says, Pittsburgh draft 2026. I'm feeling an out-of-the-box sports road trip, an after party at Paul's house. Absolutely, positively. I would be down for that just to see what the draft is going to be like in Pittsburgh or what a draft is like before it comes to DC, right? Kind of like a test run. So to have the potential to go to 2 back-to-back NFL drafts would be awesome. Both within a short drive of my house, and, the experience would be amazing. But back to DC. So obviously there's no timetable on the NFL draft for 2027. Usually they only announce that about 2 years in advance. So they probably won't announce 2027 until, next year at the draft. But let's picture this, right? Obviously DC won't have a new stadium. They're not going to have the draft at FedEx Field in Landover, whatever. This is what they're going to do. They're going to promote DC. They're going to promote the team coming back to DC. They're going to throw the draft on the Washington Mall, for those of you that have been there, basically somewhere in the vicinity between the Lincoln Memorial and the U.S. Capitol. What better backdrop is there to have on a Thursday night, in prime time in your nation's capital than, basically to be in that environment for one of the biggest NFL spectacles next to the Super Bowl that there could be. So, I certainly wish that my team, gets that announcement. And hopefully they do, but we'll see what happens and kind of where we go from there. So, it's super interesting as we kind of switch gears that, we just wrapped up the first round of OTAs. Right before that was rookie mini camps as well. Since you mentioned weather for Super Bowl, I get Pittsburgh is cold in February. Washington needs that dome to get their hand thrown in for Super Bowl. You're absolutely correct. Real quick, just touching on the stadium deal, I think that you would see something like either a completely closed dome or something like SoFi, where it's kind of open underneath, but it has the dome over top, just so they could be thrown in to the Super Bowl rotation, right? I mean, I think that's kind of like any team's dream right now is, as they're getting new stadiums, that you either almost need to make it retractable or you almost need to make it like a dome over top of an open so that you kind of still get that cold environment, but it's still covered, so you're not getting rain, you're not getting the snow, or you have the option to cover it, with the retractables or something like that. But, it'll be interesting to see what they go with, kind of where they go and how they do. And, we're going to see what happens. So switching back over to the OTA discussion, a couple of the things popped out, as you kind of read, tweets here and there, Facebook posts, videos from the team, videos and notifications from the local DC media, whatever. And we're just going to throw a couple tidbits out, not necessarily, to put a storyline together or anything, but hey, let's see what happens, right? So look, John Allen's been with the team for 5 years now, for 4 years now, going on 5th year. And John Allen is known for getting in early, one of the first to arrive, one of the last to leave. And, basically he told JP Finley from 106.7 The Fan in the DC area that, Jaden Daniels has been beating him to the facility on a daily basis. And, coming from, a rookie who, has been touted so big, he won the Heisman last year. He's our number 2 overall pick, supposed to be this great quarterback, whether it's the glitz, the glam, how hard is his work ethic, blah, 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 blah. So far through rookie minicamp and the beginning of OTAs, you're seeing a lot of really good things out of JD, right? Coming to the facility super early, JD's known for it already. Staying late, JD's putting in the time. One of the things that was super interesting that I found was apparently JD at LSU and the Commanders are actually going to go to this. I have no clue what the cost is going to be, but JD had been using virtual reality to basically learn playbooks, game plan, and do some other analytic stuff his senior year at LSU. The Washington Commanders found this super interesting because they had never done this before. And I don't even know how many NFL teams do this for their players, whether it's quarterback, wide receivers, running backs, or just other position groups. But, it's something that, hey, look, if you see a player that is having some kind of success with a certain technique or, way of learning or something like that, let's just keep promoting that. Let's work with the kid, see how far we can take this and what we can get out of him, and keep doing it. So then, I read that, the team's going to invest in a bunch of basically virtual reality stuff. So, it helps him learn the playbook better, faster, more efficient. It's going to help him basically do some analyzing and, I guess reading plays and formations and learning all that stuff, so, hey, anything to help make this kid a little better. Right. But then, it's certainly interesting as well that we know there's been some rule changes over in the off season. Right. And something that was super interesting, so to speak, was we know the kickoff and punt return are going to be changing for the upcoming season. So one of the things that they've been tinkering with is trying to find the skill sets of different people, right? And as Paul says, yes, Daniels at LSU used an Oculus with Coach Brian Kelly for speed of calling and executing plays in the offseason and the season. Okay, yep. So like I said, I'm not very familiar with the system. I'm not familiar with its capabilities and everything. But, it kind of goes back to, what we were talking about, that if, it's successful or helping somebody be successful in their preparation and their learning of the offense and game planning and, basically anything, that why wouldn't you want to just keep rolling with that and, giving your guys the best tools that they can have available to make things work, right? So it'll be super interesting. One of the other things that came out of OTAs, which is super kind of intriguing, so to speak, was the fact that there was a clip that came out and a bunch of people were like, oh my God, why is he doing it? That doesn't make any sense. But, as I kind of just hinted at, one of the things that you kind of do when you have a new coach and coaching staff, offense, defensive coordinators, whatever, of which we have everything, right? Is to find out what your guys are good at. And Dan Quinn said, after an OTA practice, we're trying to find out what unique things a player has. And basically that was in response to a question that he fielded at OTAs about Emmanuel Forbes getting some work as punt returner. As we know, Emmanuel Forbes was drafted in the first round 15th pick, I think it was, last year, cornerback out of Mississippi State, right? Tall, skinny, slanky kid. And he, look, he didn't have the most productive rookie season at cornerback, playing in the NFC East against some stellar studs at wide receiver. Definitely didn't help his cause. But, it went to back, a lot of fans were like, oh my God, like, why is this guy returning punts? We have Jamison Crowder, we had Dax Milne, blah, 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 blah. But like I said, with the rule changes for kickoff and punt return, I think you're going to tend to see some unique combination of different players and different skilled players doing punt returns and kick returns that you've never seen before, even stuff that you've probably never even dreamed of, right? It's kind of like opening up the Madden playbook and the roster and being like, look, who can I put back here at kick return that's going to get me, 20, 30 yards, maybe even have like a high percentage of breaking on loose, whether it's punt return, kick return, to give ourselves that good field position, right? And as Dan Quinn said, he's like, look, like, unless guys are given the opportunity, like, you don't know what they're good at, do guys have a hidden talent of being a decent punter so that when Tress Way gets hurt or, in the middle of the game and they need an emergency punter, like, holy shit, this guy over here, can punt the ball 50 yards and like, that's all I need. Just get it down the field. Don't shank it out of bounds, that kind of deal. Do we have an emergency quarterback somewhere on our team that we didn't know about? Do we have guys that can, fill in, at this position, even though they're primarily, another position? Can they do something really well in special teams that we didn't know about? And, it's all just part of, the interesting kind of fact finding, learning about your team that Dan Quinn is putting together, right? So it's super interesting to read all about that and what he's doing, because it's not the norm. It's not things that, a traditional coach does coming in and, putting his team through those paces. Hey, Dave, what's up? How you doing? I'm doing well. Thanks for chiming in. You can catch Dave and Paul on them 215 boys every Wednesday night, talking about their beloved Cowboys. I'm actually throwing the Cowboys some love for their show, but in all honesty, they do a great show about the Cowboys, so I can't complain too much about them. I get on the show every once in a while with them, even in the comment section, and rag with them. But those guys have a good product over there. So thanks for checking in tonight, Dave. And one of the things that's kind of goes along, as Paul says, I think it's going to be Crowder, but with the new rule is mighty shifty Dyami Brown, just like hitting Justin Fields, maybe a kick returner for the Steelers. Right. So it's about trying to get your guys that are, traditionally be on your hands team for onside kicks, which is changing this year as well. But getting guys that are, whether it's receivers, whether it's running backs, whether it's backup quarterbacks, and guys that are explosive or have the potential to be explosive players in those positions, right? So like I said, I think you're going to see a lot of unique combinations in training camp, in preseason, as teams try to figure out something different from the norm than what we've traditionally seen for punt return and kick return all these years, right? Because basically they just put somebody back. As long as you can catch the ball or fair catch, you're golden. But now you have the opportunity, to actually do something on those two plays. So we'll see what happens, right? So switching gears a little bit, one of the things that kind of came out about OTAs, but it was more, system versus system, that kind of deal. We'll start out two things, and it kind of involved the same player only because he was the one that happened to answer the questions at media availability. But Brian Robinson, starting running back, kind of the bruiser. As we know, with the offseason the Commanders had, they signed running back Austin Eckler from LA as well, kind of a little speedy dude, to kind of give you that thunder and lightning combination. But, B-Rob's been here a couple of years, was here last season and the season before. So, he got put through the paces under Bieniemy's offense, Ron Rivera's head coaching, blah, 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 blah. So couple things. One, regarding the old team regime. Two, regarding the offense from last year versus this year under Cliff Kingsbury. So let's dive into it, right? Brian Robinson basically said, hey, look, there's improved energy and enthusiasm around the Washington Commanders. That's hard to ignore. Everybody kind of knows that, right? That you had a more conservative, more or less approach under EB with the offense. And now you got Cliff Kingsbury, more of a run and gun, higher tempo offense, which we're going to get into. We're going to ask for some opinions on. But, it's also a major upgrade on how mundane, uninspired things became under Ron Rivera's guidance for the last couple of years, right? Who basically looked like a lame duck head coach, which we kind of knew from the ownership group taking over a year ago, going into last season, knowing that they weren't going to make any coaching changes, so to speak. So basically he was that lame duck, right? But Dan Quinn is changing that and all of that, right? He's got what he believes to be the right personnel in the building, both from the playing and staff standpoint. We addressed on previous episodes the staff that he brought in from other teams and the resume and pedigree that each of those individuals brings to the coaching staff. So I think he's assembled a really good coaching staff for us here in DC. He's also keen to adopt a more cohesive approach to development rather than one man ruling with an iron fist. You see that in his press conferences. You see that in OTAs. You see that in the rookie mini camps. You've seen that in the media availability from him. It's just a completely different environment and perspective from one coach to Ron Rivera, right? Oh, and as Paul says, you mean the entire Cowboy staff? Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, we only stole like 3 of your coaches and not like all 10, but yeah, we took the key ones, right? Luckily, we didn't take McCarthy. You guys can still have him. We're actually going to talk about him later tonight when we talk about whether or not Dan Quinn's on the hot seat. But going back, so what did Brian Robinson say? What did Brian Robinson do that kind of made the headlines? This was a topic that was discussed by B-Rob recently during his media availability during last week's OTAs. He highlighted the disconnect between the players and Rivera's team staff last season during their spiral that ultimately rewarded us the number 2 overall pick in the 2024 draft just a month ago, right? Something he believes has altered rapidly thanks to Quinn's improvement and the staff that he brought with him. So B-Rob said, quote, "I think it's been great, not just for me, but for everybody to adjust to this coaching staff. They've been so good with just how they connect with us, the conversations we have, and the type of conversations we have during the meetings. It's just building the connection that we probably just didn't do beforehand, hence under Rivera's staff." Continuing, "We just didn't have the coaching staff that we felt like we could build a comfortable relationship with. So we could take that relationship from the meeting room to the practice field, to the game field, to Sundays. So I feel like we've got a jump start on that right now, thanks to Coach Quinn, just allowing us to be more of a team, and that's helping us get off to a good start." Now, those are kind of all the great things that you want to hear about your new coach. You want to hear about your new coaching staff and kind of the cohesion that they've had in like 2 months' work, right? So now whether that correlates into long-term over the offseason, into training camp, into the preseason, into opening day, shall be seen. But it's all good things going forward, especially when your team's been at the bottom for so long. So it's not exactly breaking news, kind of like I just said, but it's a sign of how things have spiraled quickly under Rivera and how fast he lost that locker room last season, right? Players can only take so much of one thing, and the same thing. We kind of know that. If the opinions aren't being heard by the players, there's a distance between them, and that's the recipe for disaster. And that's when you can really just dig in and say, hey, this coach, this coordinator, this whoever, quarterback, it can go for players too, right? Has lost the locker room. It wasn't easy for Rivera. Let's be completely honest. 4 years under the Snyder regime, investigations, debacle after another debacle. Let's get that straight, right? It wasn't easy for him, but the respected coach knew he was living on borrowed time, knowing that Josh Harris just bought the team a year ago, was going into the season, wasn't going to make any changes. But as the campaign went on, lack of motivations across the board, further failed personnel moves, from the most recent draft class, the draft class before that, free agency signings, we just weren't doing what we needed to do. Robinson works primarily with the offensive staff, as we kind of know, since he's technically the RB1, RB2 on the depth chart. So this is probably an indicator of how he felt about his dealings and relationships with Eric Bieniemy for good measure. The offensive coordinator's harsh coaching measures didn't go down well with most, right? We kind of addressed that on multiple episodes here at Commander's Gridiron. It's not suited to the modern day professional player. So this marriage never looked like it was going to succeed from the beginning. And once we got kind of through the halfway through the season, we kind of knew that it wasn't working. It's very turbulent, right? So, and as we know, football in general, just like life, is all about the relationships. So the stars today need to feel part of something. They want an arm around their shoulder to motivate them rather than tougher methods of decades past. Finding that correct balance is the key, but all the signs are pointing up under Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and the defensive coordinator, and his players are responding accordingly right now. So as Paul says, the great thing about Quinn, players are buying into him. He wins the locker room. And, I wholeheartedly agree. And he's doing and showing and executing everything that he needs to make that happen. Now, whether that can be sustained over the long term, 3, 4, 5 years, even longer, shall remain to be seen. But that's what you want to see from your coach. I feel, look, every coach comes in, new coach steps up to the podium. Look, I'm going to change the culture. I'm going to change the team. We're going to the playoffs. My goal is to bring a championship to the city. You can substitute the coach's name and the city and the team for every one of those 15-second speech I just gave, right? But when you look at it and be constructive in what you're viewing, the energy level, the demeanor, the presentation of what we're getting out of Quinn is so much different than what you got out of Rivera 4 years ago in his press conferences, his introductory press conference, his first OTAs, his first offseason, right? Just something about Quinn, something about that energy, something about, the way he's going about conducting business is just so much different than what we had with Rivera's, right? So if the same trend continues throughout the offseason, I wouldn't be surprised if my team, the Commanders, do turn some heads during the 2024 campaign. Make no mistake about it, Robinson will be a significant part of any success that comes on the way for our beloved Washington Commanders. As Paul says, Kingsbury might be the downfall. He's not a player's coach. Really harsh when it gets tough, but very innovative. I run his offense for the JV team, hybrid run and gun. And it's actually one of the things that we're going to talk about next. So Paul brings up a really good thing, right? And it's super interesting because, unfortunately, it is B Rob, and he's the one that kind of provides the feedback to this next segment as we talk about the new offense versus the old, and what we're going to get under Cliff Kingsbury versus what we had under Eric Bieniemy. Not that there's a whole lot of input from Ron Rivera, a defensive-minded coach, into the offense. He kind of let EB run things his own way, that kind of deal. The offensive position coaches, which we only retained 2 out of in the new staff, blah, 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 blah. But B-Rob went, on another question during his media availability at OTAs, said the Commanders' offense will be more no huddle and more basically up-tempo, fast-paced offense, right? So, B-Rob was asked at OTAs about the differences in the early stages of the installation between Cliff Kingsbury's offense and the old installation of Eric Bieniemy's offense. So, and, it kind of brings some excitement to people, some fans, local media, when he said this, but he said it's going to be a bit faster. As far as I'm comparing it to the offensive that we had last season, I don't really want to go into much detail about what kind of play calls we would have. I just know the tempo will be faster. So before I talk about the next little subsection of B-Rob when we break it down, for those of you that are coaches, for those of you that are football gurus, for those of you that understand your team's offense and the dynamics of that offense, chime in. I want to hear from you. Give me your thoughts. Let's have a little discussion. Love to chat, right? So let's go into what B-Rob wants to say, and this will kind of correlate with what we're going to talk about here in the next couple minutes. So B-Rob says, look, compared to last season, we had a huddle type offense. This offense will be more no huddle. If I can give any idea how this offense will go, it will be a no huddle offense. I've been, and people have been screaming since days back of Jay Gruden era, we need more tempo by design. There's a difference between offense and tempo by design and offense tempo by necessity, right? So there's, and even though it's a little bit what can be correlated as like similar language, there is a difference there. Tempo by design, offensive tempo by necessity. So what is that? The difference is situational. The hurry up offense in late in half or late game situations isn't the same as playing with the tempo at any point in the game and being an aggressive team that can push a defense into uncomfortable matchup situations because they're unable to substitute, right? The first thing that kind of comes to mind, and there's probably 10,000 of them, is Aaron Rodgers. Whether you love him or hate him, he's really good at being, offensive tempo by design because he always ran his offense in Green Bay. Obviously, we didn't get to see it in New York last season because of his injury, that he would be able to keep people off the field defensively or make offensive adjustments to meet the defense, for no substitutions, for different matchups, stuff like that, right? So, a lot of media and fans here in DC want to see the tempo by design. And we believe that we'll be happy to see it. And we'll get that from the Commanders this year. It's kind of like an element of surprise because it's going to increase our pace of play and teams aren't going to be expecting that, right? So as Paul says, less motion, but so fast it dictates the flow of the game. And when the defense is gassed, it keeps the substitution out. I love this offense. It's really like a 7-on-7 in space. And kind of to take that one step further from Paul, you're absolutely right. So, it's going to be more no huddle because of that, tempo by design, and not really tempo by, or the offensive tempo by necessity. So, are you still going to see, the end of the quarter, end of the half, under the 2 minutes, going no huddle? Probably. Are you going to see the end of the game going probably no huddle? Sure, probably. But when you have JD back there with the offensive weapons that we have going into the season, like, why would you not go more up tempo by design and try to put JD under center in a huddle calling offensive scheme like they try to do with Sam Howell, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of like this direction that they're going with JD and what Kingsbury is kind of putting together for JD. So not only does, I feel like it's already Kingsbury's system and scheme to be doing that. He basically did that with Kyler Murray in Arizona, and at Texas Tech and, the other stops that he's had. But he kind of has the player to put into that system with it. A couple tweaks here and there with JD, to what he does well, what he doesn't do well. But I think, all things considered, you're going to see a decent, what you'd like to think is going to be a really decent to good offense on paper for our team in 2024, right? So it'll be interesting to see how they do that, how it works out, and kind of where they go from there. So we're going to do one more topic and then we'll do our sponsors. But the next topic coming up was actually something that caught my eye, and it kind of goes, it's the difference between the national media and the local DC media and fans, that, it's definitely something different than what they see, kind of the perspective that we see, right? And just a thought, are we going to see cue cards on the sideline? Chip Kelly used it in UCLA, and his smarter brother used it at some points on the road for crowd noise. You very well may. I'm kind of surprised you don't see that more with, a lot of the rookie quarterbacks coming out of college, because that's what they were so much used to, whether it was cue cards, whether it was a lot of hand signals, acting like air traffic controllers, or whatnot, or maybe it's just that reliability on the, the headsets and the helmets. I'm not sure, but it would be cool if they brought back the cue cards, just because of some of the funny crap that they had on them. Some of them were, had legitimate meetings. Other of them were just complete BS and just, to throw people off. But it was actually kind of cool, right? But one of the things that kind of caught my eye recently was people on, I guess it was Mina Kimes, who's on ESPN. They were talking about coaches on the hot seat. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but one of the things they brought up was one of the people on the show, Mina, threw in Dan Quinn as potential candidate to be on the hot seat this year. Couldn't figure out, where that came from, why it came from. The other person on her show didn't have him on his list, but then kind of jumped right in and was like, oh yeah, like I could see that on there, right? Look, they both went through and kind of gave their top 10 coaches in the NFL. Quinn's not on there. He's got to reestablish himself as one of the better coaches. So I could agree with him not being on the top 10. Then they gave their basically their 5 on the hot seat, right? In no particular order and subject to, some argument here. And in all honesty, there's probably some, if not little, argument here. In no particular order, Coach Saleh from the Jets, McCarthy from the Cowboys, and depending on the season they have, Sirianni could be on the hot seat as well. 2 of which are in the NFC East. They went on to have the discussion of whether Daboll from the Giants went in there. And one of the things that made this, news in the DC area was she threw in all 4 NFC East coaches. And I don't necessarily, I obviously don't agree with it. I'm kind of trying to figure out where she comes in her claim. They're basically saying, hey, look, he wasn't the one so her complaint was the offensive line behind Jaden Daniels and the situation they're putting JD in. If it looks bad to me, new ownership, I could see Quinn getting the axe, is basically what she said. The thing about Dan Quinn, he's going to be a victim of his own success. If JD looks good, people are going to want that in a job. Basically other coaches would want that in a job. They tried to paint the picture that it wasn't their first choice of head coach. It wasn't who Josh Harris wanted, et cetera, et cetera. But as Paul says, I think no to the hot seat. He has a window of expectations. McCarthy. Oh, fire him, McCarthy. Fire him now before the seat gets any hotter, right? I honestly don't see. It'd be interesting to see how long McCarthy lasts through the season. Whether your boy Jerry Jones gives him all season to do what he does. Obviously, it'll probably be record dependent, right? But it'll be interesting to watch what happens down there in Dallas. It'll be interesting to watch and see what happens in New York and Philly as well. But back to Dan Quinn. Look, Josh Harris is a very patient owner. If you look at his other professional sports teams, he's not quick to fire guys, whether it's GMs, whether it's head coaches, whether it's even star players. He's one to give them the benefit of the doubt, probably hang on to him a little bit longer than he should. Then he makes the moves and stuff like that. So I kind of think that, our beloved Dan Quinn is not on the hot seat this year. He falls into the plan for Adam Peters. I think, look, let's be realistic. He's going to have at least 3 seasons here. Hopefully longer than that if he can get some sustained success. Look, are we going to win the Super Bowl in like 3 to 4 years? Probably not. But if Dan Quinn can get us to be an annual playoff contender, I'll deem that a success, and that'll be success enough to keep Dan Quinn around for, a little while longer than just the average 3 to 4 coaching retread. So that's kind of where we are, right? As Paul says, Mina needs to worry about her Seahawks, right? She does, new head coach, Geno Smith, a couple other problems out there out in the great upper Northwest, as we know. So before we talk about our last 3 topics, we'll go ahead and hit our sponsors here at Out of the Box Sports Network. First up, Monkey Cult Coffee, the evolution of flavor-infused coffee. They have numerous flavors of coffee: that toasted coconut rum, the bourbon chocolate chip, the honey agave, their newest flavor, Use that promo code OOTB Sports at Monkey Cult Coffee for your online discount. Remember to get all of your coffee supplies, mugs, grinders, apparel, as well as the barrel aged honey. That's right. Join the cult at Monkey Cult Coffee. Use that promo code OOTB Sports at monkeycultcoffee.com for your online discount. And our good buddy, Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123, specializing in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' compensation, personal injury claims, has 3 convenient office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, one in Philadelphia, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh, PA. Remember, if you don't win, he doesn't get paid. Well, pretty much. Great guy to work with. Hit him up for all of your legal needs. That's Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. All right, as we try to finish up the show, kind of in our last 3 topics, 2 of them go, I guess they all 3 go together. It's kind of about the upcoming schedule. One's going to be super quick. It was announced, as a lot of NFL teams do, that, as we go forward, and it's kind of who you play in preseason, that you kind of do some joint practices. And it was announced, actually put out by Mike McDaniel in Miami, that we're going to be doing some joint practices with Miami this year. I kind of look forward to doing joint practices with other teams. It's not, your offense running against your defense the entire time. You get to see somebody new, somebody fresh. There's usually a scrap, at least in every joint practice in the NFL between teams, which is always good for ratings, right? But like I said, it just kind of gets you some different exposure, especially for the rookies, especially for, free agents coming into your system, trying to get on that same page, get, a little bit more work against somebody other than your own team before you go into opening week, right? And with the push of, the NFL, the NFLPA, trying to get streamlining the offseason and preseason games and blah, 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 blah. This is only good work, right? As Paul says, crazy question, where is camp held for the Commanders? Once again this year, for the 3rd year in a row, it'll be in Ashburn, Virginia at Commanders Park. For those of you that know me in the area, it's only about an hour and 15, hour and a half away from me. Short hop and skip down the road. Depending on the schedule and the weather, I'll probably go out for a day, try to see the team. Wasn't able to make it out last year, got out 2 years ago, had a good time. Last year being the first one under the new ownership group, a lot of good changes, a lot of good energy, a lot of good vibes. Kind of brought the environment of training camp back to what it used to be, even though it's not at a college or, offsite, that kind of deal. But for now, it's going to be in Ashburn. They were talking about taking it back down to Richmond this year and even next year. Might still happen. Might even go somewhere else. Who knows? But for this year, it's going to be in Ashburn. So we're going to be doing some joint practices, Miami, and that'll be interesting. I'll be excited to see what happens. Miami's got a good offense. Miami's got a good defense. Lost a couple people, but they're still a really solid, good team. Yes, it's preseason. Yes, they may not hit hard like it's game time, but good little tests going into preseason for what our team's going to be up against. Last thing we're going to talk about as we wind down the show is the schedule. Before we talk about the individual schedule and some way too early schedule predictions, one of the things that, as the schedule comes out, they're always like, hey, there's this, when you look at the schedule, it's like, who are we playing? A lot of it is already predicted, set out by like years in advance of who you're going to play, right? So obviously, you play your divisional opponents twice in the season. Then on a rotational basis, in no particular order, in this case, we play the AFC North and the NFC South. NFC South. I had to think about that for a second. And then the last 2 games, I guess 3 games, now that we went to an extended schedule, are based on your finished position from the year prior versus same position finishing teams in other divisions, right? So because we were fourth in the NFC East last year. We're playing some other fourth place teams in their division, kind of as to make up the 17 game schedule. So as you can see, the schedule is there on the side of your screen panels. First half of the season on the left, second half on the right. We got hit with another week 14 bye, same week as last year. Don't love it. Wish it was kind of like around week 10, week 11, at least a couple weeks earlier, but it kind of is what it is, right? So kind of as we look at that schedule, and look, most of these other teams that are here on Out of the Box Sports Network have our opponents, the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Giants. They're playing the AFC North. They're playing, the South. They're playing, the other NFC East teams. It's just like that 2 or 3 teams that, we're going to play, they don't play, that kind of deal. But when you look at the structure of the schedule, there's 3 things that jump out, right? And it's kind of makes you wonder, how they do the schedule, that kind of deal, right? So the first one that kind of jumps out at DC fans, and it could be the same case for the other NFC East teams. I haven't really dissected their schedule, but you can find them when their shows are coming up this week and next week. They're probably going to be talking about the schedule, kind of giving some early predictions, but they may or may not fall into the same category, right? But the DC Commanders have basically a road schedule challenge early in the season, right? So we start off at Tampa Bay. Obviously, week 2 is our home opener against New York Giants. Should be a good game, and then we turn around and go prime time against Cincinnati, JD against Joe Burrows. Then we fly all the way to the West Coast against Arizona. Then we're at Cleveland. Then we're at Baltimore. So, there's a decent amount of traveling right there in the first, 5 weeks, between 3 away games, one of which is on the West Coast, one is down south, and then we have 2 home games thrown in there in the mix. So a good bit of traveling right there between week 1 and by the time we finally come back home for a little short home stretch in week 7. So as I just said, the Commanders travel to Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Arizona Cardinals, and Cincinnati Bengals for a mouth-watering Monday Night Football appearance, which is our only Monday Night Football appearance of the season, against the Cincinnati Bengals, which is going to be their home game in Cincinnati. One more home game in week 2 against the New York Giants. But Coach Quinn's men will be accumulating a lot of air miles to begin our new era, right, under Coach Quinn. But getting it out of the way, we do have a lot of positives once we get past the traveling in the beginning of the season. Because if you look at the schedule, as we talk about traveling, and it's kind of awesome, right? That when you look at week 5, 6, and 7, okay, so we go to Baltimore as an away game. We go to the Giants as an away game. We go to Philly as an away game. So between week 4, which is Arizona, at Arizona, so when we come back in week 5, we don't travel any further than Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia until week 15 when we go to the Big Easy down in New Orleans, right? So in that 10-week span, when you're literally driving like 3 hours, if that, probably 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours is your longest road game out of 3 opponents, I'll take that. I'll take that any day of the week, right? So it'll be super interesting. The second obstacle that the Commanders hit in the scheduling for 2024, obviously I alluded to it super early, is another late bye week, week 14. While fans plan trips by looking at the schedule, one of the first ports of call for players is circling when they get that bye week, right? A lot of players look at the schedule and they're like, where's my bye week? Where's my vacation, right? But unfortunately for us, it's going to come late in our annual campaign in the 2024 season. We're slated to have that week 14. It would have been ideal to have it a little bit earlier because that's a punishing 13-week schedule leading up to that, between injuries and the trade deadline coming in and just stuff like that. It's not ideal to have a super late bye week in the NFL season. Not that we were really good last year, but last year kind of also showed why we shouldn't have a late bye week. But it is what it is, right? So it'll be interesting to see how the coaching staff and the players overcome that. As Paul says, of course, barring no injuries, no TAs, have you at 9-8, maybe 10-7. Week 9 to week 13 is tough. 3 NFC East teams at Pittsburgh, who is solid as well. Yep. It's a growing little gauntlet in there. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how things shape up going into that and moving forward, right? And kind of as you alluded to, with the schedule, look, we have the AFC North juggernauts 3 out of 4 weeks. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so you look at it, we're at Cincinnati in week 3. We are at Arizona. Then we play Cleveland. Then we play Baltimore. We play Carolina, Chicago, and then we turn around and play Pittsburgh. So just in that beginning third of the season, we're playing Cincinnati, Cleveland, Baltimore, 3 out of 4 good NFC or AFC North teams in a month period. So it's going to be a real good test for us to kind of see where we are, where we're doing, what we're going. And as luck would have it, only one of those is home against Cleveland. But it kind of is what it is, right? So as we kind of wrap up the show, the last topic is the way too early schedule prediction. So, look, you kind of gotta I never put any stock or a lot of stock into these schedule predictions. Training camp hasn't started. Nobody's gotten hurt yet. There's still some scheduling moves. Who's making the roster, the final 53-man roster. So you're basically looking at going on paper, like how excited you are for your team, your draft picks, blah, 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 right? So let's just go ahead and let's just run down the gauntlet. We're not going to dig into it too much. We're going to look at it some base value, kind of what you're feeling, how warm and fuzzy you feel, maybe a little bit off of last year, and, kind of let's see what happens, right? So we start the season at Tampa Bay. And, in all honesty, as much as I would love to give myself a victory in week 1, I'm not 100% sure that we're going to come out as clean and as crisp against a team that went to the playoffs last year, signed a long-term extension under, Baker Mayfield, that offense with Mike Evans and stuff down there. So as much as I would love to give myself the win in week 1, I think we're going to take the loss against Tampa Bay. However, when we come home, the home opener with JD, NFC East divisional battle. I think we're at home against the G-Men. I think we're going to pull off the victory. So we're going to be 1-1 after week 2. Get a little long week going into week 3 against Cincinnati. If Cincinnati is as good on paper as they are on the field this year, they've had some questions. It'll be interesting to see if Joe Burrow can stay healthy. But, for us being such a young team, still having a bunch of holes to figure out on our roster, kind of where guys feel meshing, stuff like that. I just think Cincinnati is going to be, a harder team than we're ready to deal with. So, basically we're going to drop to 1-2 after week 3. I see us bouncing back at Arizona, even though Arizona drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. I still think on paper we just have a better team than Arizona. Hopefully I'm right, and we don't fly all the way out there for nothing. Is a tough stadium to play in, one of the loudest in the NFL. They were running an NFL streak for most false penalties called against opposing teams. So it's definitely a hard environment to play in that domed stadium out in Glendale. But I think we come away with the victory. Week 5, aside from Cincinnati, I think is going to be our first true test against Cleveland. It's going to be interesting. Is Deshaun Watson going to be Deshaun Watson of old? Is going to be, Deshaun Watson of new? Cleveland has a stout defense. Let's not kid ourselves. Myles Garrett and one of the best NFL defensive players, in the NFL. Kind of what he does. As much as I would love to see us beat Cleveland, I think Cleveland's going to be a loss. So, basically at week 5, we're sitting at 2-3. Baltimore coming up. We're going to Baltimore, short hop and skip, jump up 95. Man, Baltimore is just a juggernaut, right? And as much as I would love to beat the snot out of the Ravens, I don't see us winning that game, and we're going to drop to 2-4, which isn't necessarily bad. Look, when we only had 4 wins last season, that got us the number 2 overall pick. Look, we're playing some really hard teams. We're playing some hard divisions. I think Baltimore's just that good. Can we go in and sneak one out of Baltimore? Absolutely. But in the way too early prediction, we're losing to Baltimore. However, we come back and I honestly see ourselves winning the next 2, both of which happen to be at home. Obviously, we're going to beat Carolina. That's number 1. Number 2, we're going to avenge last year's abysmal, embarrassing loss against the Bears on Thursday night football. Caleb comes to town. I don't give a crap what Caleb does. Montez Sweat's going to get tuned up and thrown out, and we're going to get another W. So I see W back to back. As much as I would like to say we're going to go into New York and win, for whatever reason, we have a hard time going into the Meadowlands, now MetLife Stadium, and beating the G-Men. I would like to say that we could beat the G-Men twice this year. However, like I said, for whatever reason, we're just bad about, going into New Jersey and beating the Giants. So I don't see us beating the Giants. We're going to have a loss. So, so basically we are at 4 wins and 5 losses for the first half of the season. Then we play Pittsburgh at home. This is going to be an interesting game. It's going to be interesting to see how Pittsburgh does with their new quarterback, how they do with the new offensive coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. It's a home game, which gives me a little bit of optimism. If there's kind of like an upset in our schedule, so to speak, or one that I think, we can kind of go in and pull out, it's going to be Pittsburgh, right? So, look, it's probably 50-50, but I'm going to give us the win against Pittsburgh right now. Way too early schedule. As we get through training camp, that could change. But we'll see what happens. Philadelphia, right? This is another game, obviously a divisional game. We go into a little divisional stretch here at Philly versus Dallas. For whatever reason, we play Philly well at Lincoln Financial. We're not going to sweep Philly, but I think we're going to split Philly. So I'm going to say that we are going to beat Philly in Philly, but then we're going to lose, in week 16 to Philly at home, right? It's kind of just the way it does. Then we have Dallas at home. I think the energy is going to be high. How is your Thanksgiving going to be this year? I might not be calling you, wishing you and the family a happy Thanksgiving. The good news is we don't have the Thanksgiving game. Luckily. So, it'll definitely be, I think we've played the last 2-3 seasons on Thanksgiving. But I'll certainly take it because I never really liked playing on Thanksgiving. But being home, Dan Quinn and company, and the guys we stole from Dallas, depending on what kind of team Dallas has by week 12, is going to be a determining factor as well. But I kind of like to see us. This is a team once again. We're not going to sweep Dallas this year. We're going to split it. That includes week 18. Saturday, Sunday, whenever they flex it to. But I think at home against Dallas, we're going to win that. We're going to lose to them on the road. The next 2 games are kind of the interesting ones. We played Tennessee. Don't know what Tennessee's really going to be this year. Tennessee loaded up a lot on weapons. So they have the potential to be really good in the AFC South. But, yeah, right. Quinn versus Pollard. Pollard plays at Tennessee now. Tennessee has Ridley now on the outside. They got Will Levis. Is Levis going to live up to the potential? By week 13, I would like to think just off the paper. Hopefully, we can beat Tennessee. And then it kind of gets a little harder, right? New Orleans. What's going to happen at New Orleans? I'd like to think that we can beat New Orleans. They're pretty inconsistent. They have a consistent defense, but offensively, they're not ever anywhere that they expect them to be. So I'd like to think that we're going to beat New Orleans. Could change, but whatever. Look, I said before we're going to beat Philly before. This time around, week 16, we're losing to Philly. Atlanta, we're going to go in Atlanta down in the dirty South and give them the business. Kirk Cousins ain't going to know what hit him, so we're taking that W. Falcons, that's going to be a good game. I feel like it's a track meet on the scoreboard. It could be, between. I mean, the only thing that might help us against Atlanta is that they picked Michael Penix number 8 in this year's draft. If they would have picked somebody like an offensive lineman or another offensive or defensive weapon who would start for them instantaneously and be a factor, that I might give the nod to Atlanta. But when your first round draft pick is going to be sitting on the bench for probably the entire season, I'm going to give us the nod super, super early against Atlanta, right? And then because we split with Dallas before, we're going to be losing to Dallas week 18. Now, that could have some playoff implications for one and or both of us, depending on how the season goes. But so that puts us at 10-7, kind of being generous. I kind of thought, and some of those, obviously could go a different way. Pittsburgh, could obviously be a loss. We probably could end up losing to Chicago, depending on how, good they end up being. We very well could end up losing to Tennessee, depending on what they come out with. If we can finish somewhere around 800, if we can finish somewhere around 500, I think I would obviously call that a success, especially since we only had 4 wins last season. Daniels is a huge bonus. The element of the unknown, no tape on him with Kingsbury, new team look with Eckler, Ertz, exactly, right? We got a bunch of unknown guys. I don't want to say unknown. We got a bunch of proven guys from other teams and our rookies that are going to make a difference for us this season. There's not going to be tape on our offense. There's not going to be tape on the players. So it'll take a couple weeks for teams to catch up. So, we could benefit and take advantage of that as well. So it'll be interesting to see where we go. So time for the $1 million question. Does my buddy Sammy Hartman make the 53 or hit the unemployment line? Well, I think he's going to make the 53, and here's why. So they're going to take 3 quarterbacks, and they're probably going to take 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. Obviously, one for the NFL, the new NFL rules that took place last season, but they released Stake from Jake Farm from the former quarterback out of Georgia. They released him, so he's not even going to make the practice squad. They had another cat, I forget his name, as quarterback, who I think is going to make the practice squad for them. So I would not be surprised if Hartman, depending on how he progresses through OTAs and training camp, he's at least going to be signed to the practice squad. I think like I said, I think with having the 3 quarterback rule now, he's got a legitimate shot at making the 53. Because it's going to be JD, Mariota, and Hartman. It would be my 3 in that, obviously in that order. So I would say, this early and from what I'm hearing, he makes the 53. It'll just be interesting to see how that all plays out with quarterback depth and kind of going from there, right? So, he could. The biggest thing with Driscoll is, Driscoll's a journeyman, but Driscoll hasn't really done anything, to be on. I want to say be on an NFL team, but if it comes down to Hartman and Driscoll, I think it's going to be which one learns Kingsbury's offense better, faster, can execute it, and kind of fits the system better to make the 53. Let's be honest, the Commanders have been, I won't say make this sound negative, but they kind of have. They've been throwing a lot of darts just to kind of see what fits at this point. Whether it's quarterbacks, whether it's wide receivers, whether it's, tight ends, whether it's secondary. Oh, Hartman can't move. Well, that's a pretty good observation, right? As with Kingsbury and a mobile offensive scheme, maybe Hartman does become the odd man out. and just make the practice squad. And Driscoll gets that third QB nod. I don't know if it's good or bad. Like that's the kind of conversation you have where it's going to be JD, Mariota, and then it's like, well, who comes in number 3, right? I would rather make the 53, but there ain't nothing to sneeze at if you also make the practice squad of an NFL team as well. So, so it'll be super interesting. But like I said, for our quick way too early schedule, I have us at 10-7. If we could finish it 8-9, 9-8, I'd be ecstatic. I'm not looking for 10 plus victories anyhow. I think the over under is on 6. It's like 4. I think it's 5.5 last I looked, for us. So I definitely take the over on that. And then, like I said, a lot of these games are going to be tougher as we get closer to the season. Once we get through training camp, we kind of figure out who makes 53-man on our team, who makes 53-man on other teams, who gets injured, who doesn't get injured, and stuff like that. Other personnel moves between teams. We're definitely going to be circling back this wagon to look at our schedule and say, hey, look, is 10-7 really realistic again? Are we going to be banking it back down to 8-9, which might be more realistic? So that'll certainly be interesting to see where things go and what happens for our beloved Commanders. And before we go, we got 2 quick things to go over. The upcoming show for them 215 boys. Yes, I'm going to throw them some love. Look, whenever one of our shows has some special guests, we try to promote that for each other. But them 215 boys, June 5th, 9:30. Special guest Tom Beebe. He's actually the dad of Copper Beebe. He just got drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. He's going to be on their show talking with them. So if you're a football fan, just in general, or even a Dallas Cowboys fan, tune in June 5th, 9:30. Catch that guest that they're going to have on there on Paul and Dave's show on them 215 boys. And as always, thank you for tuning in tonight. Our next show, Paul Spencer says, who has the better record, Caleb Williams of the Bears or Daniels of the Commanders? Man, wow, is that like the loaded question or what? Look, as much as I love my Commanders, I gotta think that. Yeah, but see, I was gonna say right off the top of my head, just without putting much thought into it, that Caleb Williams would have a better season, right? Well, his team would have a better record. But then he also plays in a really hard division. I mean, look, you got to play the Lions, you got to play the Packers, Jordan Love, you got to play the Lions, Jared Goff, and then the Vikings, and who knows what the Vikings are going to be this year. Man, like that. Divisionally, and I'd have to look at their schedule, like who else they're playing aside from their own division. You got to think that it's going to be just as tough as the NFC East, right? Like divisionally. On paper and on team, you got to think that the Bears are just a little bit better personnel wise than overall than the Washington Commanders. If their schedule is just as tough as the Commanders, then I might give the nod to JD. I don't know why, but I just feel like JD is going to be a little bit more explosive and more productive than Williams. He's got the Heisman. He's coming out of LSU. But he doesn't have the number 1 overall hype. Doesn't, I feel like there's a lot more pressure on Williams in Chicago as the number 1 overall than JD has in DC. But we'll be seeing. That's a good question. Something we'll definitely have to circle around. So I'm always looking for different little topics to talk about on future shows. So I'll probably write that one down. Speaking of which, our next show here at Commander's Gridiron is going to be on Tuesday, June 18th. I just had to look at the calendar real quick. Tuesday, June 18th is going to be our next episode here at Commander's Gridiron. As always, be a friend, tell a friend, share the network, Out of the Box Sports Entertainment on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Then we have something for everybody on our platform: football, baseball, wrestling, hockey, You name it, we got it. Check out our local programming. Give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe, get your notifications, follow your teams. And as always, we're always looking for new shows, new ideas. So if there's a team you want to promote, somebody you're a fan of, trust me, it's not hard to get behind a microphone and a screen and talk about your team for an hour every week. It's actually pretty easy, pretty fun. Hit us up, let us know. We're trying to grow the brand. And as always, we'd love to have you, new people join on. So until next time, thank you for tuning in. Have a good night. Take care.